And we're very happy to welcome Farhan Lalji from Boston, who joins us on SportsCage. Farhan, as far as I'm concerned, you are the most dedicated SportsCage contributor of anybody, by far of anybody, because A, you're joining us from Boston on a family holiday, and B, I can't remember if it was 2 years or 3 years ago, you joined us on SportsCage from a boat in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea, somewhere like that, when you're on holidays. And talk about dedication, Farhan. Most people won't do this on holidays, and you are dedicated to SportsCage.
Oh, I definitely love doing the show. And yeah, last year we went on a European trip with my family. This is a little more, vacation / business, because my son's visiting a bunch of Ivy League schools and some other schools in this part of the country, and going to football camps and getting a chance to meet coaches. And I brought my daughter and wife along just, for kicks. But,
nice.
The downside to that is my wife booked a duck tour right in the middle of when I was supposed to come on sports, on the cage. And so I'm like, oh, no, right when we were on it. Because I'm used to doing this show on Friday. And so I wasn't thinking. And we were literally in the middle of the water on this thing, and the tour guide who's a comedian, did a fantastic job of the tour, but he was nonstop talking. So I'm thinking, there's no chance for me to sneak this in during this tour. So and then we got traffic. It was supposed to be an hour and 20-minute tour. It turned into 2 hours because of traffic in Boston trying to get back to the stop. So Colston was checking in, and you were checking in for all the listeners that want to get the other side of the T-shirt, the stitch side. Yeah. Sometimes what happens on days when we try to do any show.
Right. Well, we thank you for doing it. It's really good of you and nice of you to do it. And Barney said, I'm filling in, of course, for Barney today, and he said, you can have Farhan on Wednesday, and I thanked Barney profusely because I like talking to you. But
well, sorry I'm late.
No problem. And it's also called marriage. But anyway, that's another story. Now, the big news today is the Lions are opening the upper deck for their July 19th game versus Saskatchewan for another annual Watermelon Smash. And I thought TSN did such a good job of covering the Watermelon Smash last year. It's such great visuals. How can you not have great visuals about smashing watermelons? But I thought, this is one of the best promotions going. I mean, who the heck doesn't want, especially from Saskatchewan and you're transplanted to the lower mainland, who the heck doesn't want to smash a watermelon, Farhan?
Well, for sure, and they've done a good job with this event. It's now become a real thing, and the backyard barbecue tailgate party ahead of time right outside in that area. And, so it's a pretty alive event, especially if the weather's good. And, it has been for these games before. They're opening up the upper deck for the stadium. Mm-hmm. So, it's funny. I got in a debate with another media member earlier about the fans in Saskatchewan, right? Because I've been, one of those guys that just is used to seeing bigger crowds in that beautiful stadium you guys have there. And, I've said that, look, I think Winnipeg has passed Saskatchewan in terms of in-stadium attendance and where the fans lie. But in terms of around the country, Saskatchewan still has no equal, right? Like, when the Bombers come to BC, there's a few fans from Winnipeg that come, but it's not like it is when Saskatchewan comes. And again, every time Saskatchewan comes to play in BC Place, they open the upper deck. There's probably an additional 5,000 fans that come, not just Saskatchewan fans, but fans that know the crowd's going to be really good and then they want to be a part of that event, right? So, it all adds up to good for the league whenever the Riders are involved, right?
Well, that's good. The only problem with it is the reason for it, in part, is because people leave Saskatchewan. But anyway, it helps the CFL. I was just on with Keith Willoughby, our analytics guru. He's the Dean of Business at the University of Saskatchewan. He does great analytics on the CFL. And we were talking about, how Saskatchewan's main rival has changed through the decades. We went back to the 60s, and probably their main rival in the 60s was Calgary. Through some of the 70s, it was Edmonton. There's been other eras of late, particularly because they've been so good in Winnipeg, and because nobody's been able to beat them for 5 years in the West, has been Winnipeg. Winnipeg should be our main rival here geographically, but really it's sort of, rotated amongst the other prairie teams in the CFL. Now, there's only one team in the West that's not in a prairie province. It's because you have beautiful oceans, beautiful mountains, beautiful forests, but you're not a prairie province. So, I mean, I don't know if that's isolating in some respects in the football world, but you know that market so well. Like, if the Lions have a main rival, who would you say they are?
It's a great question, and you probably go through that as well. I remember having this conversation at one point with Canuck fans, right? And Edmonton was so bad for so long that, I had people in Calgary tell me that we think Vancouver's kind of a bigger rival for us. When Jerome Ginland and Trevor Linden and Marcus Naslund in that era 20 years ago, and then obviously when both teams are good, it's going to be the Battle of Alberta. And it's the same thing in the CL that, when one of those teams is really, really bad, then, maybe the rivalry bends a bit. But as soon as the teams are of equal relevance, then Edmonton-Calgary is going to be a thing. And same thing with Winnipeg-Saskatchewan. So for us, it really depends on, who the team is at that time that's strong, right? So,
yes.
And sometimes there's other things. Like, for example, this year it's going to be Calgary. Just because of Vernon Adams and how good he was in BC for a couple of seasons. And, the one thing with Vernon is he really, really ingratiated himself in a positive way amongst the fan base here. He was legitimately involved, just like he's now become in Calgary. So when he comes back, it's going to be a thing. I think there's been, I don't want to say it's necessarily a rival, but Saskatchewan over the years has just always been a big game. And, Winnipeg now has been able to dominate BC in recent years, especially at BC Place. So, there's something to that. It was disappointing for the Lions that they had the game against Winnipeg 2 weeks ago, and Nathan Rourke couldn't play because that really took some luster off that. But, I probably would say for this year, and it'll change, it's Vernon. And then if we ever get to a 10th team and that team is in the Maritimes, it's probably going to be that, at least as far as Labor Day is concerned, as far as a coast-to-coast rivalry, because right now BC is left out. And when Ottawa didn't have a team, BC would play Montreal, but then Ottawa got there, was a natural rival. So, you'd love to see a BC Halifax, even though the fans aren't necessarily going to travel, but just that the coast-to-coast dynamic of that on Labor Day, at least, will be fun, even if it's not a rival.
Well, we can only hope that someday the Maritimes will get a team, because it would sure help with 10 and going coast to coast. Now, last week on SportsCage, I believe you were on Thursday. That night, the Bombers were playing in Calgary, and you called a Calgary win, and I didn't know of anybody else that did that other than yourself. And I just wanted to ask you, how did you come to that conclusion last week that you thought ahead of time that Stamps would beat the Bombers?
Well, number one, gut feel, which, is not necessarily something you want to bet your house on. But I just felt that the way the organization in Calgary was trying to make a big deal about that one particular event, the inaugural Stampede Bowl, and, communicating with Vernon, I got the sense that it really mattered a lot more to them. And then Vernon's had success against Winnipeg, right? So I did get the sense that if they could just find a way to protect, and that was the one piece I wasn't sure about, because Calgary's offensive line has been up and down. They've been banged up. I didn't know what we were going to get there. And there's still an unpredictable element to Calgary right now because of the newness they've got on the defensive side of the ball. So, and I think Winnipeg offensively is still finding itself. I know Brady Oliveira played in that game, and that gave me a bit of pause. But, I went with Vernon's success against Winnipeg and then just a level of gut feel around that game being at home. And I wound up picking 4 underdogs last week and hit on all of them. And by the time the games kicked off, they weren't necessarily all underdogs because some of them were pretty close, but, managed to pull a few out of the fire, including that BC game on the last kick.
Oh, my goodness, what an incredible game. If that wasn't an advertisement for watching the CFL on TSN, I don't know what was. And, I mean, you are a football coach as well, Farhan, and you know a lot about the game technically, and you've said some things in the past where you go, wow, I didn't even know that, and it was because of your coaching background, I believe, but it's weird how to set the game up at the end for the field goal, Montreal made that mental error of tagging the receiver on the ground. And so how does that happen? I mean, the coaches forget to remind them. I mean, they should know themselves. They do it with, what was it, 0.2 seconds on the clock or something. They tag the receiver. I mean, how do you explain that when you're the head coach of Montreal talking about it afterwards?
Well, look, I don't think you necessarily expect that situation to happen because it was clear Montreal was playing for the Hail Mary. When it got to 3 seconds to go in that game, you don't think there's enough time to complete a pass, go down, and still have time left on the clock. So I don't blame Montreal. So you don't discuss the tag-em-up situation in that play because you can see how many of the secondary players are back deep into the end zone. You think it's going to be a Hail Mary, and that's it. You're instructing your players to just knock the ball down. Don't try to pick it off. Don't be a hero. Don't tip it up in the air. Just knock the ball on the ground. And I know that the Lions kind of gave some credit to Javon Catoy for catching the ball and then falling into some defenders.
Oh, he fell into them. Oh.
Well, so that was kind of the suggestion that he went to them, and forced them to touch him. I think that's nonsense. I think Javon should have caught the ball and fell down immediately and given himself up because you can go back on replay and clearly determine when that happened. It didn't happen that way. He actually took 3 more steps forward and kind of fell forward, and the defenders were there. I don't know that he actually leaned into a defender or anything like that.
I didn't see that.
Because you are allowed to, so you're allowed to give yourself up. If you look at the play again, he catches it and takes 3 more steps while falling. It was needless. Catch it, fall, and you got a 47-yard field goal right there for Sean White to make. So there was a lot of nuance to that play, and the controversy around it was, did the clock start late? And it clearly did, right? Like the Lions got lucky there because the clock started at least a second after the snap, and that gave them the opportunity. I mean, when he went down, if you look at the replay, there was not just 0.2 seconds. There was 1.2 seconds left on that play, which it's just not physically possible to run the play like that. So there was a lot of nuance and question around that play, but for the Lions, it turned out.
Well, the Alouettes might replace the guy that runs their clock. I don't know. Because usually it's the other way around. There's a home field advantage. Right? What's that?
The league pays for all those guys. The league pays for the clock operators, the off-field officials, the statisticians, even though the home team provides them. Yeah, so knowing Jason Moss, he probably went up there and said, what the hell?
Probably. How big of a game? I mean, Montreal's got a pretty good defense. How big of a game was that for Nathan Rourke to win for BC?
Yeah, it was massive, right? Because the Lions had a 4-game stretch of really good teams, right? 2 against Winnipeg, 1 against Saskatchewan, and then Montreal. And you can't come out of that 0-4 and just use your quarterback as an excuse. And I just think the Lions, the roster in the room and the franchise is so about Nathan right now. I just don't believe they can function without him. They just can't. Their quarterback situation is not good enough without him. I thought in the first half of the game he played very well. The Lions took a bunch of needless penalties throughout that game. People want to talk about the Piola Stage penalty on the field goal that gave the Lions good field position after the kickoff. Mm-hmm. But to me, the Lions are the team that took so many penalties during that game, including on the scramble that Rourke had for the touchdown late in the half. Needless hold. Nathan gets around that edge without it. And then in the third quarter, it felt like Montreal really had things figured out, probably until the last 5 minutes, right, when he was able to hit Stanley Berryhill for the big touchdown and then make a couple of plays on that final drive. So for him to finish with 350 yards, for him to gut through the win because you could tell he was dealing with something. Again, he was limited in practice today because it's still not 100% healed. He talked about after the game about how this is going to be a long trip home because he knew he was going to feel it.
Okay.
So, for a lot of reasons, he needed it. The franchise needed it. They had to stop the bleeding, even if it wasn't necessarily a Picasso.
Well, one quick last question. How many hot dogs have you consumed at Fenway Park so far?
We didn't get to Fenway. My son and daughter aren't necessarily big baseball people. My wife has been to Fenway before with me, and she said, "You want to go to Fenway? You want to go to Fenway?" And so they weren't dying to go. So we just we're going to go. We're on our way to New Hampshire. He's going to camp some more, so we're going to eat some nice seafood. Paul Lapalisse has recommended some fantastic restaurants because he spent a lot of time in his early stages of his coaching career in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. So that's where we're going to be. He began his coaching career there with Ryan Day, the Ohio State head coach, and Chip Kelly, coached in the NFL and is coaching at Ohio State right now as well. So they were all kind of beginning it together. And so Paul gave me some great advice. So there won't be hot dogs at Fenway. I thought you were going to ask me about Joey Chestnut and the hot dog eating contest in New York. My wife or my daughter and I got there the day after the contest. We're still thinking about it.
Oh, do we lose Farhan? Okay. We got to go anyway, Farhan. You enjoy New Hampshire. I got a feeling New Hampshire you'll have better food than a hot dog. But thanks for joining us. Thanks for joining us on your holiday with SportsCage. We really appreciate it, Farhan. SportsCage continues. You bet. SportsCage continues in just a moment.